Good morning. Just adjusting my camera angle because I'm not entirely sure you can see me. We're up in Harrogate for a few days visiting my mum and dad, and we've booked into a hotel, and hence you might be able to see a slightly unmade bed behind me. I'm calling into the group today to share with you a really simple hack, as the word is, to get your flowers to stay in place. So what I've got for this project is my trusty jam jar, an elastic band. I've got some decorative ribbon to finish off afterwards, and also I've got some plastic net bags. So these are the kinds of things that if you buy plums or peaches from your supermarket, it's the mesh that goes over the top. And also if you've got younger children in the family, you may well have these baby bell little sacks, and I thought instead of throwing those away, I could repurpose them to create a frog. So in flower arranging terms, a frog is just something that lives in water and helps support your flowers in place. So it's just a structure to help your flowers stay in the right place. So the simplest way of doing this would be to take your mesh, and I'm going to cut away the tie bit at the top end there, and then stretch it out and place it over your jam jar and hold it with an elastic band. So I'm not going to use the red one because I've got a white ribbon and I think the red's going to show up too much, but the first decoupage jam jar I made, the red would look okay with that, and I would say that this is a great technique for holding your flowers in place, the idea being that you arrange your flowers through the gaps and the holes. And all the little projects I'm showing you over the course of this whole 6-week programme can be used together. So it's not a matter of just decoupaging your jam jar. You may want to create a mesh on it and then decoupage it, or the other way around. So you'll be able to start to layer up the techniques and combine techniques to create your own projects. So what we're sharing in the club is just some ideas that will give you a springboard to other ideas. It might make you think, oh, I could use this and I could use that. So what I am going to do is to use my white mesh because I don't want it to show up too much. Normally when we're at home and we have these meshes, we just rip our way into them. So because I knew I was coming into the group, I did carefully open them. So I'm taking off the little metal ties at the end, and then you can see that's where my opening was. Take the scissors just to make it into one flat piece, stretch over the top of my jar, and you could be doing this over a proper vase as well. And then with an elastic band, actually I did have I think a slightly whiter elastic band to hold that in place. Easier said than done. So I've gone around 3 times with that particular elastic band, and then I will go through and just tighten the edges. In fact, I need to pull that over a bit. I've got a stray hair coming up. See if I can catch that back down underneath the elastic band. I'm not entirely sure, but I can do. So just try and put it on centrally, and then you won't end up with anything pinging over. So I've pulled that really securely. It's almost like a drum tightness at the top, and at that stage I can then trim away. So I'm trimming it pretty close to the elastic band because I don't want it to show. So it's done its job and it's providing its support for my flowers, but I don't actually want to see the little frilly bits around the edge. So I just need to come a tiny bit closer so I can see what I'm doing. And you can spend longer trimming yours up. So I've still got that stray bit there up at the top. I did have to make sure when I put my flowers in I cover that bit up. Now the next thing to do is to tie it up with a ribbon. And the reason I'm doing that is because the side of it is quite unsightly. If you're really neat with your working, you could almost look like if you could leave a little collar around the end, as if you were making, do you remember when your mum used to make jam? And my mum used to put a disc of greaseproof paper at the top and then circles of cellophane, and they always stuck out at the side, so you could, if you wanted to, you know, make it a more of a design feature. But I've decided that I want to add a ribbon to it. So I've got offcuts of a satin ribbon here, so I haven't gone out and bought anything special, just pieces of ribbon that I have to hand. And I'm purely tying a ribbon around the edge and making a bow so that it looks decorative. So my elastic band has done the functional thing of holding this little grid in place. So I've just gone once round the neck there, and I'm going to have to light down the table and then tie my bow. And then what I tend to do with my bows is I then pull on the tail to make the loops a bit smaller, so that I can then really grab the loops and give it a firm yank and have my bow on like that. Now the problem when you tie this sort of conventional shoelace bow is that the loops and the tails don't always sit really neatly. So actually what I'm going to do is show you another way of tying the bow to give a slightly more professional finish. So that's my finished jam jar with the elastic band. And then with the ribbon, I've got a slightly wider piece. I've got a wide bit of ribbon there, and then a narrower bit of ribbon. Ideally, this ribbon, the second ribbon, would be even narrower, about half the width. I've probably got a 2 centimetre ribbon there and a 3 centimetre there. So you could go really narrow on the second one. With the first ribbon, which is actually going to be your bow, what you do is you put it in front of you and you bring the ends together and cross them over. It's almost as if you're putting on a tie at school, you know, your first stage of tying your tie. And the easiest way I can describe that is that you've made a little fish. So it's looped round like that. You can imagine it's sort of like a little collar. And if I hold it where it's crossed over, lift it up, you'll see this loopy bit falls down. And if you place the cross just back down onto the loopy bit, you can see already that it's started to form a bow. And this is when you need your third pair of hands ready, because when you've got your loopy bit like that, which I'll remake and hold with my scissors, like that. I put that there and put my scissors on top to hold that in place. And then the second ribbon, the much thinner ribbon, you want to fold it in half, like so. So I've got the loop here and the cut ends over here. And then taking your crossed over ribbon, put the loop behind it, and then thread these tails through the other end. So I would say this takes a bit of practice, but it does give a much more professional finish. And if you were using a ribbon that had a wire edge to it, a wire edged ribbon, you sometimes see it at Christmas time for wrapping your Christmas gifts, but it works really well because no matter how much you crumple your ribbon, you can sort of rebuild it. And this is where the value of having a really narrow ribbon comes in here, because you won't get such a bulky join. So I need to really tighten that out, and then you can adjust your tails so that they, oops, fall down. I've just loosened it a bit. Get it really tight. And there you have a bow that just looks like a natural shoelace bow, but actually is perfectly even, and the little loops here aren't being dislodged. When you tie the shoelace bow, you always end up with one high and one lower. Although I do recall seeing somebody showing, I think it was on a YouTube video, how to make a shoelace bow with equal and horizontal loops. So I must go and research that again. And then you take your jar, and I'm going to put it on my cloth there to stop it rolling around. Push that towards you, and then you put the ribbon on the top of the jar and take the long tails around the edge like that. Keep it really tight, and then back there to the front, and I'm flipping everything out of the way so that I can tie a knot to secure it. So I'm tying the knot underneath the knot at the centre of my bow really tightly. Go to a double knot there. And there you have a fancier ribbon. And you've got these long bows here. And I have got some fabric scissors, but they're out of reach now. So what I would do, I think these tails are a bit long. You can see I've used the ribbon before and I've cut the tails. If you want to do that again, it gives a nice finish, this sort of dovetail look. Also stops the ribbon from fraying. So I fold it in half, and then starting at the folded end, I cut upwards and outwards to the straight-sided edge, and then you get the neat finish there. So I'll cut this other one to length. You could try and cut all your bows to the same length, or you could have them different lengths. So these are the two bows, the tails I should say, that are attached to the ribbon itself. And then I've got these longer tails, which I might keep longer anyway, which were the tails that actually used to tie the ribbon, and I might go perhaps different lengths on those, one longer, one slightly shorter. Those bits. So there you have the finished little jar, prettily finished off with a slightly fancier bow than you might otherwise have done. So it's ended up with having 4 tails. If you didn't want it to have 4 tails, that you could come around and just tighten a knot and cut it really short, so you could just get rid of those extra tails there if you thought it was a bit too fussy. I would say though that I was using what I had to hand, and out of choice for this tying ribbon I would have had a much narrower, sort of less than a centimetre. I just think it's slightly bulkier than it should have been, but you do get the idea that then you have this grid to arrange through. So there we have the jam jar. So last night we went for a walk. It arrived too late for me to try and find a flower shop, but I have picked up very carefully these blackberries. There was an overgrown garden below, sort of derelict house that we walked past. So I've picked these blackberries, and I've picked them specifically when they were still in the red stage, and there's some green ones here. You pick them when they're really ripe, they're just going to fall off and then they'll stain and damage your surface. So I thought those are really nice, and you can see I'm holding it really gingerly because it's got lots of prickles going up the edge. And then, my spotted laurels. So I have just resized these leaves. They were sort of a centimetre wider all the way around, and I've done a circular one, and I've even been really clever and did a heart shape, so I folded that in half and went around. And I don't know whether you can see, but they're just starting to go tiniest bit of black I can see around the edge. So it's quite a fun thing to do for yourself. Across here as well, just a tiny bit of black. So I would do that. It's quite nice. It's leaf manipulation, not using the natural. So it's quite nice to be able to cut things up and change them. And it's like, a knife through butter. It's quite satisfying. I can come through and just change them. So I would do this for my own enjoyment at home. But if you were gifting your jam jar of flowers to somebody, I wouldn't do this necessarily, because you'd want it to look absolutely perfect, and if they're expecting a sort of quality finish. They would be perhaps a bit disappointed if their leaves were starting to go black after a few days. But it's a really great project, especially those of you with children at home. You could be collecting leaves. Laurel leaves work really well, and these are spotted laurel or Cuba. Not quite sure how you put the emphasis on that one, but great to pick up and get out, you know, the child-safe scissors and have a go with those. So I'm not sure again whether I'm going to actually put it in my jar this time, because it might be too big and bulky. And then I picked some equisetum, which, now the problem with not having any vases when you come away is I had my materials put into this tumbler, and you can see that they've all dropped out. And this is the problem, that equally when you're arranging flowers in your jam jar, that if your vase or your jar is too small and your materials are too long, gravity just means that they all plop out of the vase, and so they won't actually water. So I picked this up for some textural interest. So this is horsetail equisetum. Quite often see it at stately homes, and they're trying to eradicate it from the flower beds. So I would say if you find this, do not plant it at home, because it just takes over. You can get commercially grown equisetum that florists use, but it doesn't have these hairy bits on the side. It's slightly darker and greener and thicker. So it's dyed, but it is quite interesting in terms of a textural contrast, and I particularly like that sort of wave of the droopiness, the sort of arching quality there. And then I've picked some sycamore with these helicopters, and what I thought I would do here is actually to reveal the helicopters, I can cut off all the leaves. So again, you don't have to use the materials as you pick them. And I'm just making sure here it's the leaves I'm cutting off and not the helicopters themselves. So you can go through, either pinch them between your nails of your thumb and forefinger, or going through carefully with a pair of scissors. So that totally changes the shape there. It almost looks quite Japanese, quite bonsai-ish. So I've got those as well. Get rid of those leaves. And then there were some lime trees as well. I'm going to do the same thing here. You've got the lovely berries and the sort of seed casing. So exactly the same thing, going through and removing the leaves, because it covers up all the little dainty details, and I want to reveal the interesting shapes. Perhaps if the leaves were tiny, you could leave a few on. Entirely up to you. As I say, just don't do this job too quickly, because you'll end up cutting all the good bits off. So then, you know, I revealed something else there as well. And just a reminder that although we're in the height of summer, the autumn is on its way around, and the horse chestnuts, the conkers, are starting to develop as well. So I'm going to use these materials just in a really simple way. And what I'm going to start off with is my conker. So when you're doing flower arranging, you need to think about the size and shape of your material. So it's really lovely to have things that are different shapes, because it gives a contrast, and different textures. You know, we've got this sort of frilliness here with the smooth glossiness of the laurel leaf. So I would start off, if you were thinking about what your biggest material is, what your, and I always call these the wow flowers, so this isn't actually a flower. I'm going to hook it in there. You can imagine if you had a dahlia from the garden, something really big that sits quite centrally, and once you've got that central area, you can start to add other materials in. So again, I'm thinking about cutting these to size. My conker was a tiny bit short, so it's only just in the water. And I'll spin this around so I can see what I'm doing as well. I'm going to make advantage here of that bigger hole I had at the side. So resting, so I might redo that. So you could rest something off to the side. So it's all going to be quite minimal today, just needs must really. So I didn't have access to any flowers. So I'm going over to my mum and dad's later, and they do have a lovely garden, mainly full of shrubs. So I might see if I can pick anything if it's got a flower on it. And what I'm doing here is picking off all the side shoots from the equisetum. So I don't want them to be resting in the water. They'll start to rot off. And as I haven't got many materials, I think I'm inclined to group them together. So because this mesh at the top of the jar is quite decorative, I don't need to cover the full surface. You could do if you wanted to, but you could leave part of it bare and that could become a talking point. And then with my prickly blackberries, again I need to cut off the bits that would fall inside the water, inside the jam jar. So I'm trimming off some of those side shoots, doing it quite gingerly, and then holding on to the berries, which won't squidge because they're quite immature. I just want something that's about the right height. I'm not sure actually, I'm sitting too high. Cut a little bit more off that. And I'll put that there because it has got a couple of leaves on the top. It's starting just to cover up where remember there was a knobbly bit on the horse chestnut that I cut off, so it doesn't look too obvious a wound. And then I can think about these draping pieces of the lime. It's got a lovely natural movement, so whereas the bow is quite solid and the horse chestnut is quite solid, it's nice to get something with a little bit of natural movement to it, so when the breeze catches, you've got things will just rock and move around a little bit. So I should come round that side there, and this one here I can cut. So for that one stem, I've got 3 little placements out of it. I'd like to have some at the back, and I'm going to cut off that side shoot there. It's going to get in my way. So don't be afraid to cut anything. Make it do what you want it to do. You don't have to use it as it naturally formed. So I've got a 3/4 arrangement there really. So the bow is decorative, but also it's sort of underlining that focal area. What I might do is lift the horse chestnut up a bit. So it's sort of centrally lying over the bow. So where that knot is, it's sort of got a big lump of the horse chestnut in the front. And then just for some visual contrast, there's the red. So I've gone quite soft colours here really, but when I look at the red berries, I then notice the red tinge on the helicopters of the sycamore. I've got natural movement, although my equisetum is a bit dry. I've left it in there. If I decide after a little while it looks dead rather than dry, I can always just gently pull that out, and then the lime at the side just giving that little natural movement, and at the back so it just looks quite plain, and there from the top you can just see the grid coming through as well. And then what I would do is, if I wanted to reuse this, I could just take out all the materials, empty the water away, swish it out and add more water for another time. So I hope you've enjoyed that quick project. So you need to be eating some Babybel cheeses or buying yourself a punnet of peaches or nectarines or plums. I'm sort of dubious about suggesting you go out and buy plastic, but if you happen to be going out and buying these plastics, these single-use plastics, which is such a problem for our environment, you could reuse it rather than just throwing it straight away. So again, we're intercepting things on the way to the recycling bin.